Hey,
There's
everybody.
a
Welcome back to Work in Progress, where we unpack the human side of innovation, real people, bold projects, and the stories behind them. At Thinkering Collective, we believe who you are shapes what you build, and your why shapes who you build it for. Today, we're joined by Hilary Lazar, STEM coordinator at the Boys and Girls Club across Flathead and Mission Valleys in rural Montana. Over a decade experience teaching in elementary science and math, Hilary transitioned to full-time STEM education for Boys and Girls Club, bringing both connectivity and community. Hillary, you could probably do a better job at introducing yourself than I did. So why don't you dive in and do that?
Anyway, you covered most of the basics. I taught second grade for 11 years in a small elementary school in Ronan, Montana. And about that time, I realized I was getting pretty burnt out on teaching and was able to transition into creating my own STEM program there at that elementary school. And that completely rejuvenated my why and reminded me exactly why I got into teaching in the first place. And I realized it wasn't teaching that I didn't love, it was where teaching is going that I didn't love. And I found that STEM kind of plugged me back into all the creativity and the fun chaos that I really looked forward to every day at work. So when the STEM program at that school wasn't able to continue, I jumped ship on public education and was lucky enough to find a position doing exactly the same thing at my local Boys and Girls Clubs. So it's been a good transition for me.
That's amazing. Were you always the like STEM person growing up, or is that something that you like stumbled into a love of later on in life?
Definitely always, lovingly call myself and my friends science nerds. As a very young kid, I wanted nothing more than to go to space. And, that passion kind of steered me through middle school and high school science classes. Was not as much of a fan of the amount of physics and math that would have taken, but the science education that I got really was the foundation for that ongoing love of science and STEM. And the technology and engineering part kind of naturally flowed as I got better at just I have to learn this stuff because as a teacher, if you don't know the technology you're using, you're going to be useless. So I had to kind of accidentally became my school's IT person when there was no IT person on site. And then that has really served me well to do what I do with a bunch of teens and younger. So, I can wow them with certain technology that I'm good at. And then I learn a lot from them because, boy, they can look at a piece of technology I've never seen, and within 5 minutes, they can be experts on it. So I try to incorporate their love of technology into my education as well so that we can all learn together.
Yeah, there's like the new generation. I feel like we all got into technology by like breaking it and then tinkering with it and then like fixing it and then out of like necessity. And the new generation just has this innate, like you hand it to them, they're like, yeah, it works, whatever. There's no
Yeah.
they skip the breaking it step. And it's like, how lucky is
Yes,
that? Like, I remember, like,
exactly.
if I didn't fix that computer, I just didn't, that I wasn't gonna get to use
I don't.
one, and, like, I had to become an engineer, at age 14, like, figure it out. Like,
Yeah.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
What's the, let's talk about your, capstone a little bit, the evolving idea. Why don't you describe it for us?
Well, initially, I was hoping to get some local cultural traditions captured on a 360-degree camera and then turn that footage into VR experiences for the kids who weren't able to access that education in person. And the tribes that we work with here naturally are in charge of their own knowledge, and they are the ones that you need to go to get approval to share this knowledge. And out of respect for those tribal components in this mix, I decided to pivot away from specifically cultural stuff and instead focus on other activities that somehow have a barrier to the youth that I work with. And we'll do the same thing. Pick a cool activity or skill that not a lot of kids are able to access, do a 360-degree recording of an expert in action, and then put it together in a VR environment so the kids can go in and interact and experience that they otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to test out or try and see if they like it. So I was kind
Yeah.
of trying to widen it from, I know like a flight simulation is a really good example of something like this that already exists. And I thought, well, we've all seen flight simulations. A lot of the kids already have used those, so that wouldn't be novel. But something like maybe playing hockey or doing fly fishing, these are things that we live right near a river, but not a lot of kids can afford a fly fishing rod and the waders and, a fly box. So something like that might be a little bit of a good make maybe a good springboard to get started with this.
I love it. As a angler myself, that's the foundation kids need right there. It's like,
I agree.
how yeah, that's something interesting you brought up is navigating cultural responsiveness and in STEM is such
Mhm,
like a unique thing you don't hear a lot of.
mhm.
Yeah, that's kind of the center or focal point of what you do in bridging those gaps. What does that mean to you?
Well, what I have learned working here specifically, and then when you widen the scope out to other tribal areas, STEM is a huge part of the traditions that are being rediscovered and passed down again from generation to generation. Everything from making dance regalia to drum making to weapon and tool making. That is all so STEM heavy. It's really easy to teach in person, but some of those skills, again, are kind of protected by the tribes here. And that knowledge goes to very specific people for very specific reasons. So I can do a certain amount of it in my classroom, but my classroom, I can only see about 100 kids a week. So the idea of sharing that outward with kids who otherwise aren't able to be a part of it is still, I think, a viable option. So now that I've had this opportunity to sort of imagine this idea, maybe use it on a different skill that's not culturally specific, if I can bring my product back to the tribes and we would maybe revisit this dialogue, I think that they'd be willing to open the doors for me to use this in the future on something that they pick and choose for me as an appropriate knowledge or skill to share. So they haven't spent, I haven't been actually denied this opportunity. I just think that we need to put the cultural part on the back burner just for now until I have a product to bring to them. So the project itself can apply to anything.
I was just gonna say you're the champion of getting people in front of like rocket launches and stuff like that. So imagine that experience where you're
In
sitting there
fact,
and
that's
you're
a good one.
getting to watch the rocket launch. Yeah.
Yeah, that would
Love
be a good one. I have some friends who have contacts with, s- the people who let you into the SpaceX launches. Maybe we should do a rocket launch as one of them. I think that'd be really cool. So a few of these
that.
kids here have been able to do that. We took 50 kids down to Florida about 3 years ago before I even officially worked for the club, and they got to watch a rocket launch and meet astronauts and go through Cape or Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center. So maybe that's a long term goal that would allow me to kind of revisit some of my roots and my passion for astronomy and space. I like this. This is good
Exactly.
thinking.
Like, yeah, yeah. We need you to be living your spacewalk dreams out through this,
Yeah.
program there. Hillary the astronaut. Still
Uh,
it's still possible.
I'm
We could
putting the word out. If anybody ever has an opportunity to nominate someone for space for educational purposes, I'm always available.
I like it. What was the, big turning point in your life where you, realized that you had to be like a builder of programs? Because you started early on, and what was that moment where you decided you had to create something, you couldn't rely on others to do it?
I think it kind of happened in stages. When I went through my bachelor, of fine arts in education, some of the classes really allowed for a lot of creativity. They would, the professor or instructor would give you target results and then absolutely freedom to choose any way to get there. And that I found to be my favorite. Those were my favorite classes. And that was my favorite way to learn was structuring something out of the ordinary. In fact, one of the things we came up with was a skit about how crippling and narrow a basal reader program was. One of those, everybody's on page 1 today, everybody goes on to page 2 tomorrow. So we wrote a skit and performed it. We had a costume. It was Basil Bot was trying to tell us how to teach, and everybody in the class was just like, no, these are awful. So that was kind of a starting point for me. And then having to teach with those in person and in real life, it could just kind of further got me thinking like this is not my style of teaching and it's not my style of learning. And you could see which kids did well in that environment and which kids were like checked out, not getting anything out of it. And I realized the kids that were checked out far outnumbered the kids who were tuned in and learning well with that strict environment with no allowance for teacher or student creativity. So, I said earlier like that 11 years of teaching second grade felt to me like the 25 years most teachers call it quits at. Then when I was able to create my own STEM program with my own resources and my own goals and it was just complete freedom in that classroom to create what I thought the kids would learn best with. That felt like everything I'd missed out on in that 11 years of teaching. So that was then the line in the sand for me. And that STEM program, I was able to do that for 5 years before funding in the district got tight, our student population's dropping, and they just couldn't justify having that program there. And they said, well, you'll be in third grade. And it felt like I'd been shot because I can't go back to that. Not after 5 years of having this amazing amount of creativity and control in my own learning environment, and the kids were thriving. I just can't go back to what I hated for 11 years. So, got creative and looking outside the school. And that was for me, that was my career. So stepping outside of that was a real scary moment, but it's been incredibly freeing. And I, got to participate in all kinds of things that I otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity to because I left that environment. So it's a huge blessing to me. I got the opportunity to join this Thinkering Collective and a bunch of other really cool local resources that are asking me to be a part of their development and developing curriculum for our local educators. So it's been like a total blessing in disguise that for that moment of sickness and like that disgust and like depression has completely been erased.
That's amazing. One thing that when I talk to you as a parent to me is there's like that STEM and belonging, like they have a place together. What's that bridge for you?
That's one of the most exciting things about being a STEM educator is you can take the most varied group of students and within just a few minutes find something that they all are passionate about that is possible to do in the classroom together. So everybody gets some input and everybody gets to participate before we even think about moving on to whatever the next step of the project is. So with STEM, so much of it's hands-on that all the kids that want to play with stuff are in immediately. And then all the kids that aren't really excited to play with the stuff, they can still act as, I call them project managers or project supervisors. So they can be involved in their own comfort zone, telling the kids what the next step is or how we think we ought to approach the next challenge with the hands-on stuff. And pretty soon you look around and everybody's got their hands in. So it's just baby steps to creating an environment that your kiddos don't even realize that they're becoming more active in. And STEM is the perfect setting for that. I mean, you can take any project and break it down into roles that fit your students. And then pretty soon they're mixing and matching the roles by themselves because they all realize just how much fun it can be to take part in a Lego build or a straw and tape tower challenge or building a bee house out of paper tubes. They just get so involved. And it all starts with just kind of knowing your students and cultivating those roles that they're initially comfortable in. And then they start to push themselves out of their comfort zone. So that's been really cool to see that everybody in every classroom can be a STEM learner if you approach it in the right way. I can't say the right way because it's different for everybody, but you approach it at the right speed and with the right support and you'll create a completely inclusive environment. And it's just natural for STEM. It's a perfect fit.
Yeah, I really love that. What's the big challenge that rural education and STEM,
Funding is a huge problem, especially, right now. We don't need to get into the nitty gritty, but there's a massive lack of funding that was, a surprise for a lot of people recently. As the funding drops off, we're also noticing our student population in these rural areas, especially, are starting to leave public education. They've lost a lot of students to homeschool and private schools in the valley. Losing your student population, losing the funding, that makes these group projects and group learning environments a lot harder to justify or fill. And time. There is never enough time in the day for as much STEM as
Mhm.
I personally want to put into everybody's day. So when you have a class that's 90% reading and math, and then you have handwriting, science, social studies, and your soft skills to try and fit into that 10%, how do you convince somebody that STEM can do all of that in your 10%? And it can also move into reading and math, and you don't have to make it 90-10. It's just hard to get everybody to jump on that ship. And, they're being pressured from outside sources to do all the reading, all the math, and get everybody caught up. So it's what I find is inviting people in to participate helps a lot once they figure out how much STEM can cross those curricular bridges. And, your STEM education will strengthen your reading and your reading will strengthen STEM. it becomes a lot easier to sell to people if they understand just how applicable it is and how it does bridge those gaps between topics. But you got to get them there.
For the, yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. What's the, most joyful part of the journey been so far for you?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say the connections that I'm able to form with my students through this more open learning environment has been consistently my highlight. For example, in my current position, every month we write a board report that sums up what we've done that month, and then we write a little impact statement, usually a paragraph or two about something that stood out to us that month. And since I started at the Boys and Girls Club, and I noticed the same in the public school as long as I was in my STEM classroom, the highlights were always student interactions. These kids would come to me with ideas of their own that, somehow something we'd done in club or in class had inspired them. Or they'd come up with a project they wanted to try. They'd come up with some technology they were really proud of, or just something they really enjoyed doing. They'd come up to me, out of the blue, or sometime that wasn't STEM education. Oh gosh, you remember when we did this? It was so great. And I still have a lot of students from the elementary school that come and find me at the club and ask, why don't we have STEM anymore? What happened? Why aren't you there? Like, we miss STEM so much. So just seeing the difference between a STEM environment in my second grade classroom where, everything was prescribed and scripted, and then everything here is more learner based. Seeing the difference in the relationships that creates has been phenomenal for me. And it just makes every day a joy because I know that some student is going to have something good to say about STEM. And when you're in the classroom and everything's kind of locked down, everybody's just sort of glad when the day is over. Teachers want to go home, the kids want to go home. And here we have kids that are like, "Oh no, don't pick me up early. I have STEM at 4. Don't pick me up till 5," telling their teachers or their parents they want to stay late. So that has been for me my ongoing and consistent. That's my big why. These students love STEM and they need more of it. So I'm happy to oblige.
STEM, science, technology. That's a lot of non-human elements. So what's the humanizing part of STEM?
The group work really, really brings home the human element of that. So, science, technology, engineering, sometimes art and math, we like to
Yeah,
squish it all together. And
STEAM.
Ev yes, every kid in that room has a job, and even if you're talking about robotics, they're pretty quick to learn, like, well, this won't do anything without some human input, and, same with the drones. This thing cannot fly itself without somebody telling it what to do. So, they're pretty quick to figure out, that it takes a human to make technology work, and there's many, many, many millions of humans making all these little things we use every day work smoothly. My favorite example is opening a computer. Be like, there, it's your tool. It'll do everything for you. You just can't touch it. And you go, wait, it's useless. It's a paperweight.
Yeah.
So knowing that there's so many human connections with all the technology we use every day kind of helps them realize that this is a future for them. STEM can take them anywhere. Everybody from custodial staff to the people working at your food service use technology, and there's engineering behind that technology, and there's, regardless of which side of it you want to be on, STEM is going to be a lifestyle. So we try to keep that the theme throughout so that everybody remembers even machines need people.
I want like STEM is a lifestyle shirt, that like 80s retro font with like a half human, half cyborg, like smiling, waving, like some I
My
don't know.
husband's a graphic designer. We can make that happen. We can sell them on
Okay,
Thinkering.
perfect. Yeah, yeah.
STEM is a
Let's do it.
lifestyle.
Let's do it.
All right.
Awesome. Hillary, in closing, another educator out there who's got a quiet dream, what do you say to them?
Take that first step. If it is something as small as getting a second certificate or degree, maybe that's your first step. For me, that was my first step. I got a second degree in science education, and that was what opened the door to creating that STEM program for me because I was considered to be the highly qualified candidate. And that first step is going to be the hardest step, as everybody says. I mean, that's like grandma's wisdom, right? That first step's always the hardest step. But if you don't take that first step, you will never move forward. And if that first step is not the right step, you're only one step away from going back to where you were that, might be your better place. So I would say, don't be afraid to take that first step, regardless of what it is. I would say 90% of the time it's going to be the right one. It's going to be worth it. And if it's not, you haven't left everything that you know far behind. It's not a long ways to go back from one step. So that would be my advice. And that was the advice given to me before I jumped into this STEM position in my elementary school. And as I mentioned earlier, it absolutely changed everything about what I considered to be good teaching. And it opened up endless doors for me. And I'm very grateful that I had somebody to tell me, take that first step.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And
Thank you.
you know, where this is always just the beginning, the bridge for you and us and where we're gonna go. So we look forward to many more talks with you and to keep working on the AR VR project and to build that out because that's gonna be super
Yay.
awesome.
Oh, thank you.